The dollar's dominion over the world economy and the power of the United States over it are about to cease. At least that is what Ray Dalio claims to have said. When he released his book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, Ray Dalio, one of the world's most successful investors, rose to prominence in the financial sphere. His argument in this book is that the dollar will lose its status as the world's reserve currency and that the United States will no longer be a global power. He provides instances while also drawing on historical issues like the British pound and the British Empire. And he thinks that China will soon be the new power and that the Chinese yuan will replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. This notion is not fresh. The Chinese government has likewise been working toward this objective, and other economists have already made the same claim. For instance, China unveiled CBDC, a new digital yuan, a few months ago. Although it appears that the United States and its allies in China and its allies are about to start a new Cold War, tensions over the control of the financial markets are at an all-time high. But here, the key issue is whether the yuan can outperform the dollar. The answer is no, and I will explain why in this video. So let's begin by asking why a country would desire to have a dominating currency. 3 major advantages of having a dominating currency are discussed below. First, having exclusive rights to print money. Second, never going bankrupt. And third, having the power to punish your adversaries. The dollar is without a doubt the dominant currency on the financial markets right now. But first, let's examine how the dollar and the US can gain access to the first one, which is the monopoly on the currency printing machine. Currently, only the United States government may print money, and it does so through the Federal Reserve. The United States only needs to print more dollars when funding a war, a new project, or the budget deficit is required. And it truly is that easy. The process involves the United States government issuing a government bond. This bond is a statement that the holder has given the United States government a certain amount of money and will repay the debt plus interest in X years while also paying X in yearly interest. The Federal Reserve enters the picture at this point. They print money and use it to purchase the bond. Now that money is available for use by the United States government. And for precisely this reason, the United States favors the dollar's continued dominance. That is, the United States can create as many dollars as it likes as long as everyone continues to use the dollar, but the dollar will lose value in relation to other currencies the moment investors and other governments stop using the dollar. And the situation would worsen and the dollar would fall if the US government began printing even more dollars as its currency declined. That gets us to the second advantage, which is that the United States could never declare bankruptcy. Yes, the US cannot declare bankruptcy as long as the dollar remains the dominant currency in the global economy. The US government may owe hundreds of trillions of dollars, but since they have the exclusive right to create money in the US currency, they can easily continue to do so in order to pay off their debt as it is in US dollars. And for many years, it has indeed been the case. The US government has been in chronic deficit for decades. As a result, the US debt is the largest in the world. Despite this, the dollar continues to rule the global economy, allowing the United States to print money indefinitely without ever becoming bankrupt. That brings me to my final justification for a nation wanting its currency to rule the globe: sanctions. That's correct, the United States just forbids its adversary from utilizing the dollar, whether it be a nation, business, or individual. Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, and now Russia have all experienced this. Many people believe that this is not a major deal, but it is. These nations typically export raw materials or other goods, and whenever they get payments, they typically do it in US dollars. How come in dollars? Because the dollar is the most widely used and dominant currency in the world. So, if you can't use dollars anymore, you'll have to accept something else. Additionally, if the United States sanctions you, then it is likely that their allies will follow suit, and this includes Europe, Japan, and England. As a result, you would only be able to receive payments in your own currency or in infrequently used currencies like the Chinese Yuan, which is not very appealing. As a result, having the dollar rule the global economy for the United States has many advantages, including sanctions. And when considering all of these advantages, it is obvious that beating the dollar with the yuan should be China's top priority if it wants to become a global power. And anyone would claim that the yuan is going to dominate at first glance. China is the world's factory, and nearly all the goods we purchase on this planet have some relation to China. China also holds a commanding position among the BRICS nations. These nations account for 40% of the world's population, and they are in charge of the majority of the most vital natural resources. Last but not least, China is a sizable nation that has the greatest population on Earth in addition to being incredibly rich in natural resources and expertise. It follows that he will undoubtedly prevail. But I'm sad to say that this won't be happening anytime soon. And there are 4 basic causes for this. First, the yuan is complicated. The second is China's financial markets. The third is global trade. Finally, financial reserves. If you are enjoying this video and want to be aware of new videos, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Let's start by discussing the first issue, which is that the yuan is complex. That's accurate, the yuan has a lot of restrictions compared to the dollar, which is available to everyone. The CNY and the CNH are the 2 different forms of the Chinese yuan that are available on the foreign currency markets. The CNY is the yuan that can only be exchanged within China, and the CNH is the yuan that can be exchanged outside of China. In simple words, the CNY is for Chinese citizens and is completely controlled by the government. The CNY yuan cannot be taken out of China and its price is determined by the Bank of China. While on the other side of the currency is the CNH, which can be bought by us and is determined by supply and demand. It could be difficult to understand at first, but that's the goal. The yuan is complex and tightly regulated. The limits and lack of transparency are the first of several issues this causes for the yuan. If you invest in China while you are inside the country, you won't be able to withdraw your funds because they will be in CNY. Additionally, governments and investors will need to have faith in the Chinese government if they want to be encouraged to hold money in Chinese currency. The Chinese government is one of the least open, despite the fact that the majority of governments are dishonest. As a result of this mistrust, it is highly challenging to persuade investors to put their money in Chinese currency. While the world trusts the United States more than China and the dollar is more honest. Therefore, another reason why China won't be able to overtake the dollar for the time being is the complexity of the yuan. This gets me to my second argument, which is China's financial markets. It is crucial for a currency to have sizable, liquid, and accessible financial markets in order to gain acceptance in today's society. And that is a major factor in the dominance of the dollar worldwide. The American financial markets are some of the largest and most developed in the world. The New York Stock Exchange is both the most significant and liquid market in the entire globe. When we use the term liquid, we're referring to the daily exchange of substantial sums of cash. The Nigerian Stock Exchange is an illustration of an illiquid market. Despite Nigeria being a fairly huge country, there are very few investors buying and selling stocks and other financial instruments there. Whereas the New York Stock Exchange sees daily transactions worth billions of dollars. In addition to trading company shares online, you can also buy and sell corporate bonds, government bonds, and other financial derivatives like commodities. The fact that financial markets are a pillar of the capitalist economy explains why they are so significant. You can borrow money, invest in businesses, and purchase financial derivatives to reduce your economic risk. Additionally, in order for such financial markets to exist, very big institutions like banks, governments, and organizations that keep an eye on such markets like the Securities and Exchange Commission must take part in them. China's financial markets are governed by the government, in contrast to those in the US, and the great majority of Chinese businesses aren't even accessible to the general public. Only a small number of ostensibly private businesses are accessible to the general public, and even in these businesses, the Chinese government frequently controls the CEOs or holds a minority stake. Therefore, the yuan won't be able to surpass the popularity of the dollar as long as China's financial markets are still tightly regulated, unstable, and lacking in public confidence. International trade is the third reason why the yuan will not triumph over the dollar. Although China dominates global trade, more than 60% of all transactions are conducted in US dollars, which may seem incomprehensible to you. That's right, in this chart you will see in blue what percentage of transactions are made in dollars in the different regions of the world. In the Americas, as you can imagine, more than 95% are made in dollars. In Asia, almost 80% are in dollars. In Europe, 25% are in dollars because the euro dominates there. Finally, in other parts of the world, such as Africa, it is 80%. Consequently, there is little question that the dollar dominates global trade. The basic answer is that corporations who import and export goods prefer the dollar. It is quite possible that I will accept dollars even if my buyer is a Chinese company if I own a manufacturing that sells cars. The Chinese company will likely prefer to accept dollars if I import automobiles from China since they can easily move them out of the country and also because they need to pay their suppliers. While the yuan comes nowhere near to dominating global trade. The yuan must first control the payments made in international trade if it wants to rule the world. The world's reserves are in dollars rather than Chinese yuan, which brings us to our final point. In essence, government reserves are the funds that each government has set up for potential future expenditures. When they need to pay a deficit or purchase resources from another nation, they can use these reserves as a sort of savings account. Simply put, this is the additional cash they have on hand that they retain in bank accounts. And here in this graph you will see in what currency are the reserves of all the governments of the world. As you will see, the currency that is most used in reserves is the dollar, but by far. 60% of all the world's reserves are in dollars, and the second place is held by the euro. And here you will see the other currencies, and as you will see the Chinese yuan is a real minority. And why do countries have their reserves in dollars and not in Chinese yuan? Once more, this is due to the dominance of the dollar in global trade. The faith that these nations have in the dollar is yet another factor, though. World governments prefer to hold their reserves in dollars because they are aware that the dollar is more stable, more widely utilized, and they have more faith in the American government than they do in the Chinese government, despite the fact that the United States has sanctioned numerous nations, businesses, and individuals. After all, the Chinese government is a totalitarian communist regime. They are free to raise and lower the value of the yuan whenever they like, in contrast to the United States government. At least conceptually, this is a democratic and capitalist nation. This brings us to the fourth reason why, at least for the time being, the Chinese yuan cannot outperform the dollar. The key question right now is whether the Chinese yuan will ever surpass the dollar. Yes, it most likely will. But before that time comes, they must deconstruct the Chinese yuan and stop policing it, expand their financial markets, convert more trade from dollars to Chinese yuan, and finally persuade other nations to hold their reserves in Chinese yuan rather than dollars. China may eventually succeed in achieving all of this, but I don't believe it will happen in the next 10 years. We would like to hear your opinion on this. Do you think the yuan will one day replace the dollar? Let us know in the comments.